They said the numbers were terrible, the contracts were disappearing, the market had changed, and my father's life work was slowly collapsing under debts he never had time to fix. I believed them. I had just buried my father 3 weeks earlier. I was still sleeping in his old sweater, still expecting to hear his footsteps in the hallway at night, still answering my phone hoping his name would appear on the screen. Instead, my uncle called. He said we needed to talk about the business. The company had been in our family for 27 years. My father built it from nothing, starting with a rented warehouse and a single truck. By the time I was a teenager, it employed 40 people and paid for our entire life. And when he died suddenly from a heart attack, I became the majority heir. On paper. In reality, I had no idea what I was inheriting. My uncle and my older cousin ran the operations. They had always handled finances. They told me my father trusted them completely. They said I was too emotional right now to deal with complicated decisions. They said the business was barely surviving. They showed me charts. Falling revenue, rising costs, canceled orders. They said the only reason they had not closed already was because they were protecting my father's memory. They said selling my shares quietly was the smartest option. I remember sitting in my father's office, staring at the same desk where he once taught me how to sign my name properly, and listening as my uncle explained how I could walk away with something before everything collapsed. He said I should be grateful. I asked one question. How bad is it really? My cousin answered before my uncle could. He said if I waited 6 more months, there might be nothing left.
So I signed.
Not everything, just enough. I sold part of my ownership, not the controlling stake, but enough that my vote no longer mattered. They told me I was saving myself from future pain. 2 months later, I moved to another city and started over. I took a job in marketing at a small firm. I stopped checking the company website because it hurt too much to see my father's logo without him behind it. I told myself that sometimes businesses die just like people. Then one night, by accident, I saw something that did not make sense. I was scrolling through industry news when a headline caught my attention. Regional logistics firm announces record expansion after strategic investment. The company name was familiar. Too familiar. It was my father's company, the same one that was supposedly collapsing. The article said revenue had doubled in the last quarter, that new contracts were signed, that a major investor had bought a large stake months earlier. Months. I opened the date. The investment happened 2 weeks after I sold my shares. My hands started shaking. I refreshed the page. I read it again.
And again.
The company was not dying. It was thriving. And suddenly, every conversation I had with my family replayed in my head with a new meaning. The urgency. The pressure. The way they never let me talk to the accountants directly. The way they insisted I sign quickly. That night, I opened my laptop and began searching. And that was the moment I realized something terrifying. They had not saved me from a collapsing business. They had pushed me out of a profitable one. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed with my laptop open, rereading the article until the words blurred. Every sentence felt like an accusation. Record expansion. Strategic investment. Strong future outlook. None of those phrases belonged to a dying company. None of them matched the story my family had sold me with such urgency and sympathy. By morning, grief had turned into something sharper. Not anger yet. Suspicion. The kind that does not shout but quietly starts collecting facts. I took a day off work and drove to the public business registry. My father used to take me there when I was younger, explaining how transparency was the backbone of trust. I remembered laughing at how boring it all seemed. Now I sat in the same building, scrolling through filings with my heart beating so loudly I was afraid people could hear it. The first document confirmed the investment. A holding company had purchased 30% of shares. The date matched the article. 2 weeks after I signed. The second document showed something worse. Before the investor arrived, there had been a quiet internal transfer of ownership. My uncle's name appeared where mine once had been.
Temporary, it said.
Administrative adjustment. Temporary had become permanent the moment the new money entered the company. My fingers trembled as I opened more files. board meeting minutes, authorization letters, an emergency resolution approving the sale of minority shares due to financial instability. Financial instability that did not exist. Then I found the forecast report, prepared 1 month before my father died. Projected revenue growth, pending contracts, a potential acquisition offer under negotiation. They had known. Before my father's funeral. Before my tears dried. Before they told me the company was dying. They had known the business was about to become more valuable than ever. And they had rushed me out before the profit arrived. I left the registry with copies of everything, my mind racing faster than my car. By the time I reached my apartment, the story was clear. They had not stolen from me with force. They had manipulated timing, information, and trust. That afternoon, I called the company for the first time in months. I asked for the accounting department. I said I was updating personal records. My voice stayed calm, professional. They told me the CFO was in a meeting. They asked if someone else could help. I thanked them and hung up. An hour later, I called again, this time pretending to be from a consulting firm conducting market research. I asked simple questions. How long ago did the investment occur? How had revenue changed recently? The woman on the phone sounded proud. She said it was the best quarter in company history. She said everyone was excited about the future. I thanked her and ended the call. That night, I printed everything and laid the papers across my kitchen table like pieces of a crime scene. Timelines lined up perfectly. Forecast before death. Pressure after funeral. Share transfer.
Investor rifle. Profit explosion.
They had staged the collapse. The next question was harder. Why had my father not protected me from this? I opened an old folder of his documents that I had carried with me since moving. Contracts, personal notes, wills drafts, letters he never sent. Near the bottom, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in his handwriting. My hands froze before opening it. Inside was a letter dated 3 days before he died. He wrote that he was worried about my uncle, that negotiations were happening behind closed doors, that if anything happened to him suddenly, I should never sign anything without an independent lawyer. He wrote that the company was stronger than it looked, that people around me might try to rush me. He ended with one line that broke something open inside me. If you are reading this, they may already be lying. I closed my eyes and felt the last piece fall into place.
They had not only betrayed me,
they had betrayed him. And in that moment, I stopped being a daughter who had lost her father. I became the owner they thought they had erased. The first thing I did was nothing. That was the hardest part. Every instinct in me wanted to call my uncle and scream his name into the phone, to demand explanations, to throw the documents in his face and watch him fall apart. But anger makes people careless, and I already knew one thing for certain. They believed I was gone, broken, out of the game. So I stayed invisible. I asked my lawyer friend from college for a favor without telling him the full story. I said I needed help understanding a shareholder transfer that looked strange. I sent him copies of the registry documents and the forecast report. He called me 2 hours later. His voice was low and careful. He said this was not just unethical. This was fraud, material non-disclosure, breach of fiduciary duty, manipulation of a grieving heir. He said I had a case, not a small one, but timing would matter more than evidence. The investor had not finalized the acquisition yet. The final controlling stake sale was scheduled for the following month. If the deal closed before I acted, everything would become slower, messier, buried under layers of corporate protection. If I moved now, I could freeze everything. That night, I created a new email account and wrote to the investor's legal department anonymously. I attached only one document, the forecast report dated before my father's death. I wrote one sentence. You are buying shares obtained through non-disclosure and coercion from the rightful heir. Then I waited. 2 days later, the company's website went offline for maintenance. Board meetings were suddenly postponed. My cousin stopped posting celebratory updates on social media. The machine had noticed the grain of sand. My uncle called me for the first time in months. His voice was warm. Too warm. He said he missed me. He said the family had been worried. He asked how I was adjusting to the new city. I answered politely.
I said I was fine.
I said I was busy. He paused, then asked casually if I had been following the news about the company. I said I had seen something interesting. Silence stretched between us. He laughed softly and said articles exaggerate things. He said business journalism loves drama. He said I should not believe everything I read. I told him I believed documents more than headlines. The call ended quickly after that. The next morning, my mother called.
Crying.
She said my uncle was under terrible stress. She said investors were nervous. She said the family could lose everything if I caused problems now. I asked her one question. Did you know about the forecast before I signed? She did not answer. Her breathing changed. She whispered that she thought it was better if I did not know at the time. That sentence burned itself into my memory. Better for whom? Within a week, a formal letter arrived at my apartment. An invitation to return to the company as an advisory consultant. Generous salary. Flexible hours. Stock options. A chance to rebuild family trust. They were not offering kindness. They were buying silence. I showed the letter to my lawyer friend. He smiled for the first time since this began. He said now they are scared. That was when we filed the first legal notice.
Quiet. Precise.
Enough to alert the investor and the board that the previous share transfer was under formal dispute. The reaction was immediate. The acquisition was suspended. Auditors were brought in. Lawyers flooded the building. And suddenly, the story my family had carefully controlled for months was no longer theirs alone. But I was not finished. Because freezing the deal was not my revenge. Telling the truth to the people who mattered most was. They did not invite me back to the company after that. They summoned me. The message came through their lawyers. A formal request for a private meeting with the board present. They framed it as an opportunity to resolve misunderstandings before the investigation went any further. They offered transportation. They offered accommodations. They offered anything that sounded generous enough to feel like mercy. I accepted. Not because I trusted them. Because I was ready. When I walked into the boardroom 2 weeks later, nothing looked the same. The polished confidence that used to fill that space had been replaced by stiff posture and careful breathing. My uncle sat at the head of the table, but he no longer looked like the man in control. My cousin avoided my eyes. 2 auditors were present. 3 lawyers. And at the far end, a representative from the investment firm that had almost bought my future. They asked me to speak first. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I told a story. I explained how my father had built the company, how he taught me to read balance sheets before I learned algebra, how he trusted his brother with operations and trusted that his daughter would be protected if anything happened to him. Then I placed the forecast report on the table. I showed them the date. I showed them the emails scheduling negotiations before my father's funeral. I showed them the ownership transfer filed days after my signature. I read my father's letter out loud. By the time I finished, the room was silent. The investor's representative asked one question. Why was this not disclosed? My uncle tried to answer. He said it was complicated. He said things moved quickly. He said they were protecting the company. The auditor interrupted him. He said protection does not involve coercion. The lawyers began whispering. Then the investor stood up. He said his firm was withdrawing permanently. He said they would also be reporting the matter to regulatory authorities because they did not invest in stolen ownership. That was the moment everything collapsed. The board voted to suspend my uncle as interim CEO pending investigation. My cousin was removed from financial control. The internal audit expanded into a full forensic review. 2 days later, charges were filed.
Fraud.
Breach of fiduciary duty. Manipulation of an heir. They tried to negotiate a settlement with me privately. They offered money. A large amount. Enough to disappear quietly and let them rebuild without scandal. I refused. Instead, I did something they never expected. I went public. Not in anger. Not in revenge. In detail. I gave an interview to a business journalist and showed every document. I explained how grief can be used as leverage. How family can become a strategy. How silence protects the wrong people. The story spread fast. Employees learned the truth.
Client pulled contract.
Partners demanded explanations. Within a month, my uncle resigned permanently. My cousin lost his license. The company's reputation collapsed before it ever had the chance to celebrate its profits. And then something unexpected happened.
The board contacted me.
They asked if I would return, not as an employee, as the majority owner. The transfers were reversed by court order. The fraudulent shares were returned. My position was restored. When I walked back into my father's office for the first time in a year, I sat at his desk and opened the drawer where he used to keep family photos. My picture was still there. I did not rebuild the company the way it was. I rebuilt it the way he would have wanted. Transparent, ethical, protected by systems that no relative could ever exploit again. I never spoke to my uncle after the trial. My mother apologized once, quietly, in a letter. I did not answer. Some betrayals do not deserve closure. Today, when people ask me how I saved my inheritance, I tell them the truth. I did not save it. They tried to steal it, and I proved they never had the right to touch it in the first place.